Shalom, fellow kids. My name is Cody Baynert, and today I am going to be discussing my thoughts on the latest record from Ahab titled The Coral Tombs. While I do consider myself somewhat of an enjoyer of doom metal, Ahab, weirdly enough, have not been on my radar until about a month ago. The whole reason why I discovered them was simply because Spotify showed it to me through my released radar. After doing some research, I'm now aware that this band is a self-proclaimed nautic doom metal band from Germany who take inspiration from underwater themed literature, and on this particular record they take inspiration from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So as a result, I was somewhat intrigued to check this record out, although I wouldn't necessarily say entirely that hyped. However, as I listened to this thing over the course of the past week, it has been growing on me quite a lot. Like any other great doom metal band, because the songs are so slow and meditative in terms of tempo and pacing, Ahab know that in order to make that interesting, they have to make every note count. And so as a result, the songwriting on this thing is phenomenal. The melodies and chord progressions are so tasteful and thoughtful from start to finish. And while this band's sound isn't necessarily anything all that innovative or groundbreaking for doom metal, they do a really good job, in my opinion, at emulating the magic as well as the atmosphere of the ocean. Part of that is due to this album's very organic as well as very cavernous and dark sounding production. And as a result, I feel pretty comfortable describing this thing as Thalassophobia, the metal soundtrack. Although now that I think about it, that is also pelagial by the band, literally called The Ocean, but I think the description still applies to this record as well. Interestingly enough, the album's opening track, one second, what was the name of this song? Professor Aronnax's Descent into the Vast Oceans, that song. Anyways, the first minute of that first track starts on a surprisingly very immediate and blistering note with some really speedy and overwhelming black metal paired with these horrifying guest vocals from Chris Dark from the band Ulfa. After that, the track seamlessly transitions into these very lush and surprisingly very pretty and relaxing softer passages before vocalist Daniel Drost, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, introduces the listener to his, quite frankly, phenomenal clean vocals. Daniel has a very dramatic, almost operatic singing voice, but his sense of melody as well as his vocal prowess makes this work. The song then finally crescendos into a pretty emotional finale, resulting in a song that, despite its really heavy and aggressive intro, is overall genuinely quite beautiful. The album's following track, titled Colossus of the Liquid Graves, is probably the album's most immediate and accessible track, as well as also probably the least ambitious. And while I don't find it quite as impressive as other tracks as a result, it is still a thoroughly well-written and well-made piece nonetheless. Something else that I want to point out about the band's songwriting is their ability to effectively utilize these softer ambient intros before the wall of sound guitars kick in. And this is showcased on the following two tracks titled Mobilis and Mobili, I think, and The Sea as a Desert, respectfully. The former of which uses these very eerie and minimalistic, I think, glockenspiel, which helps to build tension, and the latter of which, fitting to its name, almost feels like the soundtrack to riding on a camel on some sunset-lit Sahara desert-like environment. Speaking of this track, it has one of, if not probably my favorite chorus on this whole record. I almost feel like thinking about it is almost giving me the urge to sing it out loud, although I'm not going to because I don't have as good of a singing voice as Daniel, and I don't want to publicly embarrass myself on YouTube. The sea, yes. Okay. The following track, titled A Coral Tomb, is kind of an interesting one. I just praised the way that the band uses these ambient intros and softer passages, but almost the entirety of this track feels like some sort of extended version of one of those intros. And while I love the melodies and the mysterious and alluring and hypnotic atmosphere of this track, I do find it meanders for a little bit longer than I think it should. And then when all that tension finally leads to a payoff in the form of a crescendo, it feels a little bit too short lived and relatively unsatisfying. The following two tracks are pretty much what you would expect from the band at this point on the album, but the album's closing track, titled The Maelstrom, towards the second half, uses these almost wailing sounding clean vocals that make the song somewhat eerie. And that eeriness turns into blatant terror when guest vocalist Greg Chandler from the band Esoteric belts out these harrowing shrieks on top of this very dark sounding chord progression, resulting in a really fucking bleak way to end the whole record. Now, in terms of criticisms with this thing, the main critique I have for it is the length. This is a 66-minute opus, and that length can feel especially tiresome due to how the last four out of its seven tracks are all over 10 minutes long and feature very similar pacing. And while the pacing obviously isn't exactly the same throughout these four tracks, it is similar enough to make things feel just a little bit repetitive towards the very end of this record. And even though I just praised how much I love Daniel's singing, his guttural growls to me feel just kind of there. While they're not terrible and they don't detract my enjoyment of this record all that much, I have trouble finding them powerful and menacing enough to the point where they significantly add to the band's sound. And as much as I really appreciate the production of this thing, there were certain parts that I felt could benefit from having a more full and loud sounding production, especially during the more aggressive and heavy riffs of songs such as Colossus of the Liquid Graves and Mobilis and Mobili. However, this thing overall is really impressive and well written and dynamic, and as menacing and dark as it can get, it's also genuinely quite beautiful for a good chunk of the time. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the new Ahab record. What are your thoughts on this album? Have you given it a listen? If so, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comments down below, as well as any constructive feedback on my review. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.